Hello everyone. I prepared this video in order to explain to you a couple of points with regard to the prohibition of discrimination, the application of Article 14 of the European Convention on Human Rights, and then with regard to the notion of discrimination in non-compliance with Article 14 as understood by the European Court. So you see here slides uploaded on the Moodle which are rich in references to cases, specific cases. You can check these cases out on the website of the European Court, but I thought that it might be useful that just very briefly I describe to you certain selected cases from the slides so that you clearly understand why I use them as examples, and through them I can also facilitate your understanding of application of Article 14 and the related issues. So when we talk about Article 14 and its application, then that it's always needs to be kept in mind that this article can be applied connected to other articles, other provisions of the European Convention. So whenever you have a case of discrimination and you decide to turn to the Strasbourg Court, it's better to check out first whether there is a potential violation of another article in the European Convention connected to which the submission on the Article 14 can be successfully argued for. So if you look at slide number 3, then you see here that I brought up as an example the case of Haas versus the Netherlands. This was about a heritage dispute. So there was this man who was supposed to have a kid outside marriage. So basically the applicant who was the kid himself, so he argued that he claimed that he was the child of this man, but he never officially acknowledged as a child this boy. But he regularly visited them, him and the mother. He refused to marry the mother. But he paid regularly certain costs coming up with growing the child, and so de facto he was a dad, but officially speaking he was not the father of the kid. And so when he passed away, he failed to leave any will behind. So because of that, and by the force of law, there was a nephew, the nephew of the father, who by law inherited his properties. And then the applicant, this boy who was born outside marriage, turned to the Strasbourg court, claiming that, but he's a more direct relative. And that he was discriminated against, because if we compare his situation with another kid's situation who was born in marriage, then he was clearly discriminated against. And then the court, as a first step, checked out whether there is a potential violation and application of another article of the European Convention in picture. And in this case, obviously, Article 8, the protection of private and family life was relevant. So basically the court found and concluded that since this child was born outside marriage and he was not acknowledged officially by the father, because of that there is no issue of family life, officially speaking, and therefore Article 8 could not be applied. And as a result of that, Article 14 cannot be considered. So basically the application was rejected based on this argumentation. So you see here, this is an example to illustrate this rule that there should be another article, another provision of the convention in picture, while arguing for the violation of Article 14, as opposed to that, in the case of Protocol 12, that would introduce an autonomous norm of the prohibition of discrimination, when discrimination and discriminatory conduct can be argued against, and applications can be filed based on that, even if there's no alleged violation of another article of the convention applicable and claimable. But there is another right outside the convention which was restricted and violated. But as you see in your readings as well, this protocol has not been signed or ratified by a high number or the majority of states, member states of the Council of Europe, and it does not have a rich case law, so its application is just slowly and gradually growing. Now, when we focus on the notion of the prohibition of discrimination, there are clearly indicated points to keep in mind on the slides, from slide number 5 until slide number 8. So you see a very clearly structured notion of the prohibition of discrimination as understood by the European Court of Human Rights. And just to clarify a couple of points related to that, here on slide number 5, it's mentioned that there should be a comparable situation. So the applicant should be a member of a social group, of a group of the society, whose situation is substantively comparable to another group of the society, clear-cut group of the society. And so, as opposed to that other group, discriminatory measures were taken by the authorities. And so I brought up this classic case from the European Court of Human Rights case law, which is the Burden and Burden versus UK. This was the story of two sisters. These two sisters lived together for like more than 40 years in the same house, the family house, and they lived together. They did not have any partners. So basically they were kind of like a couple living together. And when one of them passed away, then the sister had to pay a succession fee for the house itself. And she was claiming that, but look, I mean, I've been living here in this house for more than 40 years together with my sister. We were like a couple, and how come that I have to pay a succession fee? While if it's a married couple and the husband or the wife passes away, then obviously the partner, wife or husband, doesn't need to pay a succession fee for the common property, the house or the apartment itself, in which they both live together as a family. And so there, basically, the court checked, okay, all these two groups of the society, so siblings, and on the other side, married couples or registered partners, all their situations substantively comparable, so that we can talk about the violation of prohibition of discrimination. And the court found that no, they are not comparable, because still married couples are a whole different construct compared to siblings under the current circumstances and the current norms in the society. And it's not a coincidence, and it has a good reason, that states favor married couples as opposed to siblings whenever it comes to rules on taxes, or in this case, succession fees. I'm so sad that we don't have a classroom live discussion about it, because I guess that many of you would be outraged about it, because it doesn't make really no sense. I mean, these siblings were living together de facto just like a couple, except for assumably without sex, but other than that, they were functioning just like a couple. Why did she have to pay the succession fee for the house? But right now, I'm just telling you what's the standpoint of the European Court without declaring that I agree with this view. So if you go on with the notion and the different points, and you see that the different treatment is imposed by the state authorities based on a certain protected characteristics, you see that there is a list of protected characteristics in Article 14. Open up the document, the European Convention on Human Rights, and look at Article 14, and you will see that this list is an open-ended list. So the groups that and the characteristics that you find there as examples are not the only possible protected characteristics that can be claimed at the European Court. And so there is an arm, a substantive and significant arm caused by the discriminatory measures, and a very important part of the analysis of the whole discriminatory measure context is whether there is any reasonable justification for the discriminatory measures, because even the restriction, even the violation of formal violation of Article 14, I mean here even discriminatory measures, can be acceptable if there is convincing and reasonable justification behind. So, for example, if it's this discriminative measure is part of affirmative action, so it's about positive discrimination, that it can be acceptable for the European Court, because basically it serves the enhancement, the protection, and the strengthening of an otherwise traditionally vulnerable group of the society. Now, two additional fundamental rules that the court applies when talking about the application of Article 14. One is that by now I spoke about the situation where there is a comparable two groups and there is discriminatory treatment against a member of one of the groups, but then we can have the situation when we have two groups which are in different situations. So not comparable situations, but different situations. And different situation groups and different cases should be treated in different ways according to the court. And you see here on the slide number 6 an example for that, a specific example, and that's the Greek case, Tlimenos versus Greece. And that was the applicant was affiliated with the religious group of Jehovah's Witnesses. And so based on that religious belief, earlier he denied to join the army. So basically he rejected armed services. And based on that, he was convicted for insubordination. And later on, when he tried to get employed as an accountant, so he tried to register in the accountant's registry, then he was refused because he was said by the registry of accountants that and the respective authorities that, sorry, but you were a convicted person. And no one with a criminal record can join in officially the circle of accountants. So that's an excluding circumstance. And here the applicant argued, and the court agreed with that argumentation, that, sorry, but being convicted for example, robbery or manslaughter is a whole different issue when you are convicted for denying armed service out of religious belief, because clearly there is no real criminal conduct behind that action. So in that case as well, the court said that these two groups, criminals convicted for real criminal conduct like robbery, and those criminals like who were formally convicted for a crime which is under domestic law, a crime like insubordination in this case, these are whole different cases, and therefore they should be handled differently. And this guy should have been registered as an accountant focused on, like, related to this one circumstance. So it shouldn't have been an obstacle of the registration. Another very important point and standard set by the court with regard to the prohibition of discrimination is that if, compared to the European Convention and its content and its provisions, the state decides to give certain additional rights to the citizens or to the people residing on the territory of the state, then discrimination shouldn't be done in these cases or with regard to these rights. So the equal treatment and the principle of equal treatment should be respected, even related to these additional rights provided by the state, those rights which are otherwise not enshrined in the European Convention itself. And a very classic case for that is that you can come across in your reading as well is the EB versus France case, and that was about the measure of the French legislation that they entitled single persons, single individuals, so unmarried individuals who were not even in a partnership, in a registered partnership, but singles. The French law entitled them to adopt a child. And as opposed to heterosexual singles, in the case of the applicant, EB, the French authorities denied this right. And they said that based on the fact that the applicant was lesbian, so based on sexual orientation, the authorities rejected the request for the adoption of a child. And this lady turned to the Strasbourg court, and then the Strasbourg court, based on the general approach I just introduced to you in abstract terms a second ago, based on that, the court found that, yes, there was a violation of Article 14, even if the right of lesbian people to adopt a child is not enshrined in the European Convention. And in general, the special rights of single people to adopt a child is not to be found in the convention, but still the French legislation decided to entitle single individuals to do that. And because of that, an equal treatment should be provided to all the individuals without respect to sexual orientation and without distinction or differentiation based on sexual orientation. Now, you see, last point related to the notion of discrimination, which is prohibited by Article 14, that when it comes to certain specific particular characteristics, then the convincing, the argument that the government is bringing up in the trial at the Strasbourg court should be particularly convincing to the court. And these protected characteristics are gender, nationality, ethnicity, religious affiliation, and sexual orientation. And you find on the following two slides, so slide number 7 and slide number 8, specific examples for all these protected characteristics only one point I wanted to add here, that on slide number 8, there is this Portuguese case, Quing versus Portugal. This case I brought in as a kind of negative example to show you that even nationality cannot be a ground for claiming the violation of Article 14 if it's like absolutely transparent and obvious that the whole state measure is not about nationality. So that's an illustration for the fact that it doesn't mean if you come up with a case which relates to these special particular characteristics like gender, nationality, and so on, it does not mean that you immediately have a successful case. And the strong case, obviously, you should come up with all the evidences on discriminative measure and the harm caused by it related, which is connected to the given protected characteristics in order to have a successful case and application at the European Court. If you're interested in further details of these cases, just check out the HUDOC, the search engine, and the which is available through the website of the European Court of Human Rights, and make some further research on them. For sure, in the exam where we're going to discuss with you on if we happen to discuss with you the issue of discrimination, then I would just pose questions related to the cases that I explained to you right now in details. All right, have a nice day, have a nice week. Bye-bye.